If leaking is cool, Robert Mueller is certainly the Miles Davis of the Department of Justice. I'm joined again by my friend and champion of justice, Larry Klayman. Larry, how are you?
Good to see you, Jason. My pleasure.
Good to see you. Good to see you as always, Larry. You know, there's very few people who have the courage to stand up to Robert Mueller and some of the other people in the DOJ, but you are doing that. You're doing it on behalf of Dr. Jerome Corsi. We've been speaking about the doctor for the past several weeks as he has become the subject of investigation by, well, we should say, he's been subpoenaed and he's been speaking to Robert Mueller's special counsel. He's been revealing to the public some of the criminal tactics that are being employed. Why don't you give us a little update as far as what's happening with Dr. Corsi and the case that you're representing him in?
Well, of course, if you want more information than what we can provide in this show, Jason, they can go to corsination.com. That's Jerry's website, and donate to his legal defense fund. This is going to be an expensive proposition. And you can go to larryklayman.com and take a look at it there. As well, I have a case for Freedom Watch. That's the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, which is not directly related to Dr. Corsi, but it does deal with the leaks that we're going to talk about, and people can donate to freedomwatchusa.org because we do need the help as well. But the status of the case is such that 2 weeks ago, we filed a criminal complaint before Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, before the Criminal Division of the Justice Department, before the Inspector General, before the Office of Professional Responsibility, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, and the Bar Disciplinary Council for the District of Columbia. They regulate misconduct by lawyers. Now, that case is presumably proceeding ahead. We're going to put pressure on the Justice Department to do something, but we're not waiting for the Justice Department to take action. You can't these days, obviously. And a week ago, we filed a lawsuit directly against Mueller, and it alleges that there were not only illegal surveillance activities that were going on, and we, of course, know that President Trump was illegally surveilled at the Trump Tower with his associates and family, that calls overseas were unmasked in violation of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And we also know that there have been grand jury leaks, and we've confirmed that this week, and we can talk more about it. So that lawsuit for $350 million is directly against Robert Mueller. It's against the people he's been working with, including the entities he's been working with, the National Security Agency, the FBI, the CIA. They're all part of this $350 million lawsuit, but the primary target is Robert Mueller because he's been orchestrating this illegal activity.
Yeah. Well, you know, Larry, this is a critically important lawsuit because it's not actually just against Robert Mueller personally. This is a lawsuit that you guys are filing to shine a light on this criminal spying that's been going on for a long time. We've spoken to Bill Binney about this, about how the NSA uses personal information, gathers all the personal information, electronic communications from everyone in the United States of America. And this has been going on in full force since the days after 9/11. So this is really a landmark case in a number of ways. It's shocking to me the number of smears that have come out against Dr. Corsi, particularly after you guys announced this action to challenge Robert Mueller. It really is thug tactics on the part of the special counsel's office. If you don't submit to what they want, they come after you with everything.
Well, that's right. I mean, they've subpoenaed other witnesses that they brought before the grand jury to ask them about Dr. Corsi. They went with his stepson and harassed his stepson most recently, FBI agents sent by Robert Mueller. It's an intimidation tactic. We know the FBI does these things. During the time of the Clinton years when there was an issue about Vince Foster, whether he was killed or whether he committed suicide, and people were discussing his relationship with Hillary Clinton. It was pretty much confirmed that he had had an affair with her when she was still straight. She's not terribly interested in men these days. But in any event, people were being followed down the street by FBI agents, and they're used in a way to intimidate people. FBI agents showed up at my house at Hillendale, my townhouse, and I asked the guard there. It was a gated community. Ironically, Robert Mueller lived in that community.
Wow.
At the time I was living there. I think he still does. And I asked the guard, I said, you know, he told me when I came in one night, he said, somebody was taking pictures in front of your house. I said, what's that about? And he says, well, it was a property appraiser. And then I asked him, I said, well, how many other pictures were being taken in front of other people's houses? None. Okay, so this is what they do to try to get you to back off and to scare you, notwithstanding the illegal surveillance that goes on routinely. I'm sure my phones are monitored, everybody's phones are monitored who are challenging the government. And it goes far beyond that. We know from Edward Snowden that hundreds of millions of Americans were subject to illegal, mass, unconstitutional surveillance without probable cause. And that's why I got two injunctions, preliminary injunctions, against Obama's National Security Agency. Now, we had this case that we just filed, signed as a related case to Judge Richard Leon. He's the courageous judge who issued the decisions on our behalf against Obama's National Security Agency. And this case is related because I brought that case. It's called Klayman versus Obama. You can read about it at freedomwatchusa.org. And that gave rise to the USA Freedom Act because Congress tried to correct it, the illegal surveillance, but the agencies went on and continued to do it anyway. We know that. So Leon has this, and there's going to be a hearing on January 3rd, a major hearing in this case that Dr. Corsi brought, that I brought on his behalf in courtroom 18 at 333 Constitution Avenue, Washington, D.C., and I hope people will come and observe. It's going to be a packed courtroom, so come early.
Yeah, I'll be there for sure. And definitely we want to remind people that they can read up about these cases at freedomwatchusa.org. It really is important for Crowdsource the Truth viewers to support Freedom Watch. There really aren't many, I don't know of any other lawyers that are standing up for the Constitution and for liberty in the way that Larry and his team at Freedom Watch are. So it's important that you have our support. Larry, there's been a lot of people interviewing Dr. Corsi. Of course, he's got to get his side of the story out. They're trying to really smear him. And you had given me some of the FOIA documents that were turned over by the special counsel's office after Judge Emmett Sullivan found in your favor in that FOIA suit that you brought against the special counsel. They've been, slowly doling that stuff out. I found this interview to be particularly suspicious because this is our friend Ari Melber, who starts off by saying that Robert Mueller doesn't leak. Let's listen to this for a second.
Bob Mueller's office doesn't leak, but one of their potential criminal targets is leaking the entire draft indictment and statement of offense. I'm going to show it to you right here. This is a draft court document that Mueller said
What is he talking about here that Robert Mueller's office doesn't leak? Where does he get that from? Why does he lead his story with that? And how is Dr. Corsi releasing his own legal case to the public leaking? He's not a government agency.
Well, this is MSNBC, as Mark Levin calls them, MSLSD. They used to have an expression, lean over. I used to say it was closer to bend over. It was lean forward, actually. And I said It should bend over. But, but I mean, they're not honest people. They're despicable, dishonest people. And that's the line of the left, that Robert Mueller is holier than thou. Somehow he's their Christ figure. Unfortunately, he doesn't obviously match up, particularly Ari doesn't in particular, and some of the others over there. But this is despicable what's been going on. And we know that Mueller's been leaking. A year and a half, leaks every single day. And this is the modus operandi of the government. They'll leak, but if you leak, you get accused of doing something that's not right. But most recently, as you know, and Dr. Corsi was on Fox Business just last night with Trish Regan.
Yes.
And he was discussing a situation that came up with regard to some grand jury testimony that had been given with regard to a doctor that he had been trying to help, and an individual by the name of Tommy Stickler who had cancer. And he selfishly raised money for that person. and he's being smeared in that regard, being accused of things that he didn't do. And the only way that this information could have come out was through the grand jury, because there were some witnesses before the grand jury recently that were called to harass Dr. Corsi and to put pressure on him. And this reporter by the name of Chuck Ross, on behalf of the Daily Caller, calls Jerry Corsi up, Dr. Corsi, my client and friend, and he says, I've got information from the special counsel that you were committing some kind of a fraud with regard to raising money for this cancer patient that was being treated by this particular doctor. And consequently, this is now direct evidence of grand jury leaks, which are criminal. But before that, Jason, as you know, because you went through a lot of the documents that we got from Mueller's office in a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit in front of a very fine judge, Emmett Sullivan, who I'm going to give an award to, actually, as one of the best judges in the United States in the next several weeks, is that he didn't ask for it, and I'm just going to give it, as I used to do it at Judicial Watch. But we showed that, and you uncovered along with us, that the press spokesperson, Peter Carr, was meeting secretly at a cafe, a French cafe on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., 801 Pennsylvania Avenue, and that's likely where all these leaks occur, in addition to other means, through Andrew Wiseman, through Jeannie Rhee, through other prosecutors. So we now have him dead to rights, figuratively speaking, Mueller, and this is going to be a subject of our hearing on January 3rd in front of Judge Leon. It's part and parcel to the complete illegality of the way Mueller is proceeding with his probe.
Yeah, and I think you are really kind of tapping on the surface of a much bigger story here, Larry, because what we've identified in those leaks is it's not just a matter of leaking. It seems, in my opinion, to show us a method by which the press and the Department of Justice are linked. Some of the leaks that we saw, and I'm sorry to digress from the Dr. Corsi matter for a moment, but we saw Shane Harris contacting Peter Carr. Shane, of course, was with the Wall Street Journal at the time, and he's informing Peter Carr of this information having to do with Peter Smith. Now, I've been following this Peter Smith story for over a year because Peter was in direct contact with Charles Ortel, and it seemed very clearly to me that Shane Harris of the Wall Street Journal was planting a story with the special counsel's office. So it's not just leaking, it seems to be this manipulation of the truth that goes both ways. Back to this Daily Caller item for just a moment, I find it very curious that it brings up this bullet point here where it says that Dr. Corsi raised $25,000 for an Alaskan man who claimed he needed surgery from an Israeli doctor. There's been an ongoing campaign in social media to link Dr. Corsi to Israel, to claim that he is Mossad or paying me to be linked to Israel, all kinds of ridiculous things. I think Dr. Corsi did a very good job of rebutting this ridiculousness. He met with the kid who needed the surgery. He's seen photographs of this person in the hospital receiving treatment, etc. So, I mean, again, it's I don't believe, from what I know about Dr. Corsi, that he would knowingly be engaged in fraud. Whereas on the in the case of Robert Mueller, well, we know he spent 13 years covering up facts and details related to 9/11. We know that he failed to prosecute or even bring about any investigation with regard to the numerous crimes going on at the Clinton Foundation. So this seems to be really egregious. I mean, you guys are bringing a prosecutorial misconduct complaint against Mueller. I'm certainly hopeful that that goes the distance that it can go.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're pursuing a number of grounds, and undoubtedly by the time this thing's over, we'll have amended the complaint, because things are happening every day to coerce, intimidate, and threaten Dr. Corsi. And he's, of course, at the eye of the hurricane. He's being falsely accused of coordinating, the leaks of WikiLeaks. And in fact, WikiLeaks today published this story of the Daily Caller, which shows that, he doesn't have a relationship with WikiLeaks. The story is not flattering, to say the least. It was leaked to the Daily Caller, which interestingly enough was started by Tucker Carlson on Fox. And Tucker Carlson, I got to tell you about Tucker. I mean, he does some good things, but Tucker plays both sides of the street. And I remember when I was a young guy at Judicial Watch, he was writing a hit piece against me for Time magazine. And I remember him on Crossfire going after me about some of the cases I was bringing at Judicial Watch. And he's been very anti-Trump lately. So it's interesting that they went to a so-called conservative publication. You know, I don't want to beat up on Fox too much here. We got more important things to do. But Fox has been moving left. And Fox Business, I think, is actually kept closer to the conservative line with Trish Regan, with Lou Dobbs, and with others. And so consequently, it's interesting that it found its way into the Daily Caller.
Yeah. And you know, Larry, WikiLeaks, they really want to take out Assange. I mean, I know that Dr. Corsi did not communicate with Julian Assange, but the question that I have is, even if he did, why is that? I mean, what's the big deal? He's a journalist reporting information. They're not, in my estimation, focusing in on the actual crimes, which are the things that Hillary Clinton and John Podesta were talking about in their emails. They're trying to kill the messenger, in this case, Julian Assange, and they're going after anyone who they can try to tie to Assange.
Well, yeah, and this is the way things have been for a very long time. Look, I've been fighting the Clintons since 1994 when I started Judicial Watch, and later I started Freedom Watch, and I have all kinds of lawsuits. They are protected, and so are the Democrats. And you know, it's a real disgrace. You know, the Republicans are being thrown out on their rear end from the House of Representatives because, you know, they're just so ineffective, and their modus operandi is basically just to get themselves on cable news and to raise money, but they never accomplish anything. And you know, the courts, they're highly infested with leftist judges. Judge Sullivan is the only example of a Democrat judge who I think has had any courage in my lifetime, and that's why I appreciate him so much. We have a good relationship. I respect him. He respects me. He's an honest man. But frankly, these Democrat judges that are on the bench, most of them are hacks. And then you've got, of course, the Justice Department, which has become so highly corrupt. It's unbelievable. Just today it was learned that the cell phones of Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the Lovebirds, while they were working for Mueller, were scrubbed. None of the communications on those cell phones can be found. And then, you know, and then the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, comes forward with no explanation for this, like he doesn't know that this was intentional. I mean, he's a complete hack as well. So that's why we got to put pressure on Matthew Whitaker to make sure that Horowitz does his job, Office of Professional Responsibility does its job, the Criminal Division does its job, and others. And then you've got the president sitting on top of this with his lawyers who are more intent, like the Republicans on Capitol Hill, to showboat on television than to actually push back. Why is it, Jason, that Jerry Corsi has to take action here directly against Mueller, and the president's own lawyers sit there playing patty cakes?
It's an excellent question. I've wondered that myself.
As he's getting dragged to the guillotine to have his head chopped off by the Democrats, particularly Pelosi, Schiff, Nadler, and the rest of them, he'll be impeached by mid-January for sure.
Yeah.
And you know, then we get into a situation where we get into a constitutional crisis. Country's not functioning. It's a very serious situation. But where are the president's lawyers? What are they doing?
Yeah. So you brought up Matthew Whitaker, and he's also been coming under fire lately. What about this guy, William P. Barr? Why is Donald Trump nominating an H.W. Bush guy to be the new Attorney General, and what do we think about him?
I think the reason is that they think he can get confirmed fairly quickly. You know, he's been confirmed before for a number of political positions, including Attorney General. You know, I want to keep an open mind. I don't want to alienate him by attacking him at this point, but I got to tell you, I'm not hopeful that he will be very strong because he's Republican establishment. He's George W. Bush. You know, he is 68. Maybe, you know, he'll let it rip at the end of his career, but I doubt it. And I think it's going to be more of the same. I wish the president had nominated Bob Barr. Now, Bob's got courage. I work with Bob. We submitted articles of impeachment against Clinton. Bob does what he thinks is right. So I think they got the wrong Barr. But let's hope that he does something. I've got other cases in front of the Justice Department now for the Bundys and for Francis Schaefer Cox, and I want them to do something. But thus far, in fact, with regard to the Bundys, they're proceeding ahead with their appeal after even a very pro Obama Justice Department judge, Gloria Navarro in Las Vegas, threw it out. So the Justice Department has ground to a halt. It's corrupt to the core. And it's a real mess, and I hope that William Barr will do something, but frankly, I'm not hopeful that that'll happen.
I mean, I would tell you, Larry, in my estimation, it's worse than grinding to a halt. It's become a criminal organization, and I'm serious when I say that, because just getting back to Robert Mueller and his tactics, particularly with regard to the interaction between the mainstream press and people in the Department of Justice, specifically Robert Mueller's special counsel office. Robert Mueller is not some guy who they plucked off the street and stuck into this position. He's a swamp monster who's been around for a long, long time. And of course, everybody remembers it wasn't all that long ago. It was just 2 or 3 weeks ago that this story in The Guardian came out saying that Paul Manafort held secret talks with Julian Assange and the Ecuadorian embassy. This was such a ridiculous story on its face. Obviously, at this point, Manafort has come forward and said that his passport indicates that he was not in England when they said that he was. WikiLeaks denied this story right away. I was convinced the moment this came out that it was originally intended to say Charles Ortel held secret talks with Julian Assange, because I believe what they're trying to do is publicly smear anyone who has strong evidence and who has made a compelling argument that condemns any of the people that we're talking about here: Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Robert Mueller.
You're right, Jason, is that the left-wing press is complicit. They are partners with the deep state. They're partners with Mueller. They're partners with the left that want to destroy this president. They're partners with the Republican establishment deep state that also wants to destroy President Trump. Look, they're starting to abandon him already on Capitol Hill. I mean, we see that. And they want to have their own candidate run in 2020. Both parties. They want Trump out. He broke up their money train. He broke up their power position. Both sides want him out. The Republican Party is only slightly less despicable than the Democrat Party, and only because they're not borderline communist. I mean, they win out by a slight hair, by a furlough, let's say. But this leftist media, and that's why we have a leftist media strike force at Freedom Watch, and we're not just sitting there getting documents and going on TV. We're actually bringing cases. Sheriff Joe Arpaio brought a lawsuit this week against Jeff Zucker, the head of CNN, of Chris Cuomo, and CNN itself, as well as the Huffington Post and the Rolling Stone, because they branded him a felon. He's not a felon. There was a finding that he committed a misdemeanor. He was pardoned for it. In fact, it's up on appeal to have the whole thing washed out. He didn't intentionally violate any court order. The judge that was out there in Arizona, Murray Snow, is a crazy lunatic who stands in front of the bench like Mussolini most of the time, And he's as big as LeBron James. I mean, the guy's unbelievable, and he's corrupt. So, we're fighting back, and Sheriff Arpaio brought a case against the New York Times that also tried to destroy him. Now I've got Judge Roy Moore in Alabama. We sued Sacha Baron Cohen. That's been all over the media this week, including in Israel, because he was defrauded. Judge Moore is a fine man. He's not a pedophile, but they had to destroy him to get this guy, Doug Jones, elected senator down there in Alabama for the Democrats, and that's what it's about. So, and then I've got our cases, our class action against the social media companies. Well, and just in the last day, you and I talked about it this morning, we've gone down from almost 70,000 subscribers on YouTube, that's owned by Google, to 32,000 just overnight. And under the pretext that they're cleaning out, phony accounts. Well, that's the pretext, okay? So I'll be going into court shortly on that. Laura Loomer has been banned from Twitter. She was reportedly banned from PayPal. I mean, this is an effort across the board with the Muellers of the world, with the hack journalists of the left, with the individuals that now are in charge of Congress, Pelosi, Schiff, Nadler, on the Senate side, Booker, Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas. I mean, the whole lot of them. We are in a war, left against right, and they're pulling every stop out, and there's violence in the streets. If you think what's going on in France is bad, wait till you see what's going to happen here, God forbid,
Right.
in the months. So we're trying to avoid that and using a legal remedy here. And Dr. Corsi's at the forefront. He's the only guy who's really taking it on. And I'm representing him, and I'm proud to do that. But
Yeah.
where's the president? Wake up, I said it before. It's a little bit like the movie Moonstruck when Cher hits, Nicolas Cage and says, snap out of it.
Right.
The president better start snapping out of it because you know what? He's going to the guillotine.
Yeah.
And lawyers are just facilitating that. I don't mean to beat up on them. Rudy Giuliani's a nice man. I really like Jay Sekulow. But what the hell are they doing? Why are they sitting there and watch this president be destroyed? Well, Jerry Corsi is the guy who's taking the lead.
Yeah, Larry, it's a question you've been asking for months when you appear on this show and other shows, and it's like, I don't want to say I'm losing faith, but I can't understand why. At first, I was thinking, well, maybe he was waiting for the midterms, maybe Trump had some kind of plan, but it's beginning to feel like we may be past time to act. And when we see him nominating people like Barr to be the Attorney General, we don't want Bush guys in there. We need people who are going to drain the swamp. We're running out of time to drain this damn swamp. It's really clogged up.
Now, that's right. There was a very gleeful article in the Washington Post today, owned by Jeff Bezos, richest man in the world for Amazon, saying that every aspect of the president's existence, personal in terms of his businesses, are under investigation. And of course, they were predicting doom. And the way things look today, I mean, who's to say they're wrong? But I mean, they're very happy about that because the Washington Post has become the biggest piece of trash of any major newspaper. It's even worse than the New York Times. It's a complete disgrace. But they're right. Every aspect of the president is under investigation. And there's threats against his son, Donald Jr., against Jared Kushner. His daughter's being trashed by Jimmy Kimmel, sexual jokes and things like that. It's totally out of control. And it's disgusting. It's despicable. And in terms of Mueller, it's criminal.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's talk about this for a minute because that's an interesting point. And it seems to me that the overarching theme here is that if they can control the narrative, they can control reality. They publish things in newspapers, they put them out on television, they put it out in social media, and if they keep beating the drum enough, it would seem that those things sort of become true to some people at least. Last week we had Mark Meadows chaired a hearing where whistleblowers came to share information about the Clinton Foundation. Now, a lot of people, including some members of Congress like Ms. Norton, were disappointed that these whistleblowers weren't necessarily whistleblowers in the traditional sense. These weren't guys who were working for the Clinton Foundation coming forward with heretofore unknown or unseen information. But of course, Larry Doyle and Mr. Moynihan there were testifying. They're financial investigators who are hired by law firms and corporations to look into these things. And what I took from that hearing is that these guys plan to submit their findings to the IRS, and under the whistleblower program, the IRS actually provides financial rewards to people that bring tax cheats to their attention. Now, that does make them whistleblowers, right?
Well, it does. But, here's the thing about this, Jason. And, it's good they had a hearing. It's entertaining, great. Okay. We've known about the Clinton Foundation for decades. I mean, we've known about it. I brought a RICO case, racketeering case, in the Southern District of Florida. It was assigned to a Clinton appointee, Judge Middlebrooks. Okay, another great one, okay, on the bench, so to speak, okay? And who was the lawyer representing the Clinton Foundation? Jeannie Rhee, the same lawyer
Wow.
that is participating with Aaron Zelinsky and others, and Robert Mueller, working with Robert Mueller to threaten Corsi with prosecution if he doesn't lie. Okay, so we've known all about this. Peter Schweizer's written 2 books about it. Okay, I uncovered stuff. My former group uncovered stuff, but it's all been out there, but yet nothing happens. So don't expect the government to do anything. And see, this is what's different between, I've said it before, Freedom Watch today and Judicial Watch when I ran it, is that Tom Fitton will go into me and say, oh, I got all these great documents, this is what we uncovered. Gee, I hope that the Justice Department's going to do something. You know what? Hope's eternal. Okay, but you got to do something. And we're bringing lawsuits, actual lawsuits, not just getting documents. So this is why we need to be supported at Freedom Watch. And this is why you need to support Dr. Corsi. Go to corsination.com, because documents aren't going to do it. Books aren't going to do it. Hearings are not going to do it. We have to frontally challenge them legally in the courts. And we've got 2 good judges. We've got Judge Richard Leon and we've got Judge Sullivan. And that's quite rare to find judges like this. And we've got a shot. And we've got to try to do it peacefully and legally before all hell breaks loose in this country. Because once the president's impeached, God forbid, I pray it does not happen. But, left may start it, but the right may finish it in the streets.
So, Larry, just to clarify for us from a legal standpoint, Donald Trump being impeached, I mean, it's basically inevitable. Once the Democrats take over the House, they'll bring that impeachment. That's just the act of accusing him of, basically, it's an indictment, right? It's an accusation. They can impeach him for virtually anything, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've said before they could impeach him for making love to a horse. That's what they could do.
So when you say that you fear him being impeached, I mean, there's a big difference between him being impeached and being found guilty of anything. Obviously, we've got these hack attorneys like Jeannie Rhee, who she's got a pretty substantial conflict of interest based on what you're telling us here, that she's intimidating Corsi and, she's been involved in protecting the Clintons for years.
Well, let me give you a really bad scenario here, too, because this impeachment proceeding will come up early in the next 2 years. When Clinton was impeached, it was towards the end of his presidency. There's going to be 2 years left. So don't count on the Republicans in the Senate putting up a great defense for the president when he's impeached and then the matter goes over to the Senate. I think people like Mitch McConnell, like Lindsey Graham and others, these two-faced individuals, would like to see the president gone, and they'd like to see him gone quickly, because then they can have their guy inserted in there to run in 2020. So don't expect there to be a great defense. I mean, he could presumably wind up getting convicted, and that's what's so scary about this whole thing. And that's why
convicted of what?
Well, convicted of being impeached.
But
convicted. Well, let's take it. Let's take a scenario here. Okay, these so-called illegal campaign contributions paying off Stormy Daniels and paying off Karen McDougal.
Right.
Okay. Let's take Mueller's report, which is going to come out in the next few weeks, at least an interim report, enough in time for Pelosi and Schiff and company to introduce articles of impeachment and have them voted out. So, we're going to wind up with a trial in the Senate. What I'm saying is, don't count on these establishment Republicans and putting up a great effort to defend the president. It's not guaranteed, because if they get rid of him early, they can get someone else in there, whether it's Mike Pence or someone else to run in 2020. They want him out.
Yeah, Mike Pence, that would be scary. So, all right, but this is all basically, see, they seem like things that we're jumping around to, but it all is pretty related. And I mean, the tactics being used against Dr. Corsi are essentially identical to the tactics that were used against Michael Cohen. And it was interesting at that Mark Meadows hearing where Mr. Moynihan and Mr. Doyle were testifying, there was a Democratic Congresswoman, Norton, who, as I understand it, was a Yale law professor. I think maybe you told me, or maybe Charles told me this, that Hillary Clinton actually studied under her. And I noticed quite apparently that Mark Meadows conducted himself just sort of like a guy who was asking questions, trying to get answers. And Ms. Norton very much behaved like an aggressive lawyer trying to basically get these guys to say things that could then be used later. She also made a point of saying that the president's lawyer had admitted to these crimes. So now the piece of evidence becomes this confession by Michael Cohen. But of course, if Michael Cohen is threatened with 30 years in jail, which is essentially the rest of his life, unless he pleads guilty to this other lesser crime, can't the prosecutor just select any crime for somebody to plead to in a plea deal, Larry, even if it's not something they necessarily did?
Well, yeah, and that's what happens. I don't know about Michael Cohen, but look at General Flynn, Mike Flynn. Okay, I mean, his lying obviously is debatable whether he intended to lie or not, but that was what they put forward to get him convicted, to squeeze him to testify against the president. And I think General Flynn is a good man, and I doubt that he said anything that was wrong in terms of implicating the president. But that's what was the intent of all of this. So that's their game. Now I see that you had a picture of George Stephanopoulos up there that you were showing our viewers. He's one of the most despicable people, along with Lanny Davis, that I've ever met in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Stephanopoulos was actually sanctioned by Judge Royce Lambert during the Clinton years when I took a deposition of him. He came in unshaven. He was a commentator, as he is today, on ABC. He'd left the White House. He was White House communications director. He ran the war room, which was to destroy the Clinton women, who I was, in fact, defending, Jennifer Flowers, Dolly Kyle Browning, Paula Jones, Juanita Broderick, to smear her despicably. And Lambert actually found that he had lied under oath.
Wow.
And he had showed a disrespect towards Lambert, which I think provoked Lambert actually to make that finding, which was inaccurate in any event. But this guy was lined up by Lanny Davis, who's been Cohen's lawyer. Lanny is the sleaziest individual as a lawyer I've ever met in Washington, D.C. I mean, just listen to him. The slime rolls off of him. And he put forward Cohen. I mean, he sacrificed Cohen because his objective is to take Trump down. He's very pro-Clinton. He went to Yale with Hillary and Bill. And he pretends that he's even-handed. He's even been on Hannity a lot in the past, on Fox and this and that. But I can't say enough bad things about Lanny Davis. And it's interesting that while the D.C. Bar Disciplinary Council is entertaining a complaint filed by 16 leftist law professors against Kellyanne Conway for something that she said on Fox News, which really is not ethical violation, that they've never pursued anything against Lanny Davis when he admitted that he lied in the media about Michael Cohen and the evidence that he had. And, it shows you the duality. So you've got not just Mueller, not just the media, not just the deep state at the Justice Department and the other agencies, but you actually have bar authorities who are running interference for the left. They all donate, nearly all of them donate to Democrat candidates. The left is in a full-fledged war against the right, and they're using every means they can. So it's quite remarkable.
Larry, I find it interesting. I just looked up Lanny Davis here, and in addition to being a co-founder and partner of Davis, Goldberg, and Galper, Lanny is also the co-founder of a public relations firm called Trident DMG. And these public relations firms in Washington, D.C. are somewhat questionable in my mind because that's a very broad description. Public relations can involve a lot of different activities. I've noticed people that I've known in New York City who are involved in public relations. They're hosting parties for new product launches, etc. In Los Angeles, people that I've known that are involved in public relations are doing film premieres and things like that. And in Washington, D.C., it seems like a lot of these public relations firms sort of straddle the line with political opposition research. They seem to possibly be hiring people to put out stories, whether it's in social media or wherever, posing as journalists, but actually putting out propaganda. Of course, we all know that the 2014 National Defense Authorization Act substantially changed the Smith-Mundt Act with the Smith modernization that enabled the United States government to actually utilize propaganda against U.S. citizens. And so obviously there are companies that are rising up to service that need. There's going to be government budgets that satisfy that. How do we know when someone like Trident DMG or this law firm is hiring a PR firm to do these kind of smear campaigns?
This is the deep state. This is why people are disgusted at Washington, D.C. Now, where did Lanny Davis come from before he started these groups? He was with the law firm called Patton, Boggs, and Blow. You may have heard of that. Hale Boggs. Hale Boggs literally invented the practice of raising money for candidates on Capitol Hill and then calling in the chits for his client. Okay, legalized bribery in effect. Okay, so this is Lanny's roots at Patton, Boggs, and Blow. Who came from Patton, Boggs, and Blow? Ron Brown, okay, former Commerce Secretary, who was involved in the Chinagate scandal, which I helped uncover at Judicial Watch. Again, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton behind it.
Let me pause you there for 1 second, Larry, because I'd like the statisticians in our audience just to take note of the fact that you've just mentioned two individuals that were involved in the same law firm who both died in plane crashes. What are the odds of that? And Hale Boggs, of course, was on the Warren Commission. He was the first member of the Warren Commission to publicly question the findings of the Warren Commission. I mean, I got to tell you something, Larry. I really do hope that Donald Trump is successful in the second half of his first term. I hope that Donald Trump is reelected to a second term, and I hope that he drains the swamp. But even if he fails in doing that, he already has been such an important and historic president in that he has revealed so much of this swamp activity that we were really never paying attention to before.
That's a really good point. In many ways, he's drawn them out of the swamp. Now we see who they are in a much clearer fashion. And they've come forward to destroy him. Now, you know, the president's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect, Jason. You know, but I'll tell you something. His heart is in the right place. And he's the first president in my lifetime who actually calls it as he sees it.
Right.
You know, we do have judges that make decisions on the basis of their political affiliations and their prejudices. You know, we do have an immigration system which is totally broken. We do need a wall. We do have a situation where treaties that we have signed have been, in effect, traitorous against this country because we got people like the Bush family that were very close with the Saudis and others, oil interests and whatever. You know, as I said, perhaps on an earlier show, I was watching this funeral, you know, and I was mourning the death of George H.W. Bush. I mean, pay respect, he was a president of the United States. But this is one of the most corrupt families that has ever occupied the White House, just short of the Clintons. And they were in bed with the Saudis. I mean, he got $1 billion worth of investment for the Carlyle Company when he was with it, George H.W. Bush. You know, but this president calls it like he sees it. And we haven't seen that before in American history.
No, we haven't. I'm certainly hopeful that the speculation that's going around the internet about these notes that went out to everybody at the funeral, I hope that that's something of significance. I'm just looking at the Trident DMG website right now, and I think people can have a field day with this imagery here. The obelisk of the Washington Monument as photographed from inside the Lincoln Memorial. Another obelisk in the middle of London in the Tower of Big Ben. The next image they're going to bring up is the obelisk at the former location of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Sorry, I don't have any commentary on the Golden Gate Bridge, but I'm not so sure what's going on with this Trident DMG, and I don't think I trust too many of these PR firms that are super hooked up with the swampy law firms there in D.C. But just to bring it back to Michael Flynn for a second, Larry, because you brought him up, and of course there's a sentencing hearing happening in Judge Emmett Sullivan's court next week for Michael Flynn. Can you comment at all for us, Larry, on the seemingly strange pivot from this Russia collusion and all this attention on Michael Flynn being, according to Mueller and the people that like Mueller, the worst guy ever, they seem to have totally turned away from that, recommending no jail time for Michael Flynn, and now suddenly paying porn stars and Playboy models is the worst crime somebody could be involved in.
That's right. And I believe, and I'll make a prediction, I think that Judge Emmett Sullivan's going to throw the whole conviction out. I do believe.
Of Michael Flynn.
Yeah. Sullivan threw out the conviction of Senator Ted Stevens in Alaska when he found that Brady exculpatory material was withheld. That was after the fact, after the conviction. So it'll be interesting to see, and I hope that they don't do it, but if that conviction's thrown out for the alleged false statement under 18 U.S.C. 1001 that Flynn was alleged to have made, will Mueller go back and indict him for other things? And that'll be very interesting to watch. And I hope they don't do it, because General's a good man, and he doesn't deserve what happened to him.
So now this whole issue has just come up where Emmett Sullivan has demanded these 302s. The 302 documents that we've seen in the public were heavily redacted. There's been talk about Emmett Sullivan seeing these 302s in camera, which you've told me, as opposed to my previous career where that annoys the visual effects department when we're doing stuff in camera. That means the judge is looking at it in private. The public can't see it, but the judge gets to see it. Do we know if Judge Sullivan has seen these unredacted 302s, or we don't know yet?
I'm sure he has. And I've asked for him to look at redactions that were made in our Freedom of Information Act case with regard to the Mueller leaks. So this is a very good judge. And like I said earlier, he didn't ask me to give him an award, but I'm going to have Freedom Watch give him an award. I used to give awards at Judicial Watch. I'd like to say good things about people when you can find, someone that is worthy of it, and he is.
Yeah.
And there are a few other judges in this courthouse. You got Judge Royce Lamberth, by the way, who drew the Arpaio cases this week. He's an extremely fine judge. He made a lot of good rulings during the Clinton years, and he recently made a ruling with regard to discovery, with regard to another matter, which is important. You've got Judge Leon, but they are very few and far between. We've got this judge now in Texas who invalidated Obamacare today.
Right.
Judge O'Connor, I mean, he's a great man. You've got Judge Hainan in the Southern District of Texas that knocked out Obama's amnesty. There are a few that have guts. But on the other side of the coin, you have these politicians, including Brett Kavanaugh, who now is on the Supreme Court, who basically took an exit stage left this week because Planned Parenthood was involved. They beat him into submission, and he didn't review the case. And basically he was excoriated by Justice Clarence Thomas for his cowardice. And I predicted that, too, because Kavanaugh, regrettably, is a political hack. And the president made a mistake in putting him on the Supreme Court.
There have been a couple of mistakes that have been made. Let's talk for a moment. I mean, you brought it up. It's important. Let's talk for a moment about the unconstitutional judgment that was made with regard to Obamacare. I've felt that way for a long time. I think a lot of people in the public don't seem to understand the difference between socialist-funded health care and insurance. The nature of insurance, whether it's insurance on your car or insurance for your health, is that is a company that's placing a bet. They're essentially betting that most of the people that take out car insurance aren't going to crash their car, and that they can manage the money obtained from the insurance premiums well enough that they'll still make a profit at the end of the day when they pay out the limited number of people who do crash their cars. So people who respond with indignation when insurance companies don't want to take on people with pre-existing health conditions, I mean, that is the antithesis of what insurance is. The insurance company is betting that you'll remain healthy. You're purchasing the insurance in case you don't. So we're sort of arguing about two different things when we talk about this. What Obamacare is not is government-funded health care, but it seems like a lot of people want it to be that, and it seems like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton want people to think that's what it is. They're really just the biggest insurance salespeople in the world.
Well, I'm not an expert on the insurance industry, thank God. But to me, it would have made more sense if we took care of poor people and people with pre-existing conditions and left the rest of us alone and let us have our insurance policies, rather than messing up the entire system. And that's what they did. They just completely screwed it up. And of course, it was John Roberts who voted with Kavanaugh this week, by the way, not surprising, to not take up the Planned Parenthood case. So you don't count on the Supreme Court having a solid 5-4 conservative majority. It does not have that. It's only Alito, it's only Thomas, and it's only Gorsuch who are the true conservatives. You only have 3 real conservatives on the Supreme Court. And we'll see what happens when this case of O'Connor, he's in the Northern District of Texas, goes up to the Supreme Court. Don't hold your breath that decision is going to be affirmed.
Right. Well, we're running out of time here, Larry, so let me bring it back to Dr. Corsi for a moment, because obviously that's the point where you're most engaged in your basically tete-a-tete with Robert Mueller, and this seems to be the crack in the door that's going to allow you to get in there with a legitimate legal defense. And all these other matters are directly related, because it seems like Mueller is just trying to intimidate, threaten, and harass anyone at all who is related at all to President Donald Trump in what is just an insane effort to take the president out. What's the next step that we can expect in this case against Mueller on behalf of Dr. Corsi?
Our January 3rd hearing, of course, that's over whether this is a related case. But the fact that Judge Leon set it down for a hearing, he didn't have to do that, shows that he wants to discuss other things as well about this case. And this case is related to the case I brought, the now famous case Klayman v. Obama. You can see that at freedomwatchusa.org, where we enjoined the intelligence agencies from this mass illegal surveillance. Robert Mueller would be very unwise to indict Jerry Corsi, because that'll give us an opportunity to challenge his authority head on. And he is unconstitutionally pursuing this investigation, and we won't flinch. We need people's financial support. We need to get bigger here at Freedom Watch in terms of what we're doing on the other side. And of course, he needs the help for his legal defense fund, of course, because there is nothing else out there right now who is courageous enough, frankly, and if I may scratch my own back, to take Mueller on. Everybody else has caved. Dr. Corsi has not caved. And he's doing it not just for himself, he's doing it for the American people, he's doing it for the President of the United States.
Absolutely. I don't think we can overstate the courage, the bravery, the sacrifice that Dr. Corsi is making. I mean, he is standing up to the full force of the government. Robert Mueller is a thug who basically, utilizes the power, as we've heard from Bill Binney, utilizes information from the NSA. Now, so you've said you've enjoined the NSA. Doesn't that mean they are under court order to stop doing it? What does that mean, that you've enjoined them?
They were. Here's what happened, is that we got a preliminary injunction, said they had to cease and desist. Judge Leon said, I'll stay it until it goes up on appeal. In the interim, this was back in 2014, in the interim, this provoked Congress to enact the USA Freedom Act, which was supposed to eliminate this illegal mass surveillance. But we know that that never happened, okay? A lot of reports, we know the unmaskings on President Trump and his colleagues, wiretaps on the Trump Tower, other examples. There have been actually Inspector General reports at the NSA and the FBI that shows that this illegal surveillance continued. So I brought new lawsuits. Those are pending. There's another hearing on January 9th before the D.C. Circuit, the appellate court, and you're invited to attend that too as well, Jason, and others, which is dealing with this whole issue that it never stopped, and we want injunctions again. Let me just also divert a little bit here, is that I had Dr. Corsi on my radio show this week, in addition to listening to Crowdsource the Truth on Pantheon and YouTube, etc. Go to freedomwatchusa.org, listen to this radio show, Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman, because I get into Dr. Corsi's history. He's a very distinguished man. He's a good man. And also, we get into depth in what's going on, and I let him talk. You'll hear most of what he has to say, not me. So I hope that you'll go there to freedomwatchusa.org and listen to that radio show. You can also go to radioamerica.com. That's a very great radio station that I'm on, and they let me say what I want to say, and they're truly conservative. So a little advertisement there.
Absolutely. I always like supporting you and your efforts at freedomwatchusa.org. It's interesting to note, Larry, where I'm getting a tremendous amount of slowdown on the internet performance here. That seems to happen quite a bit when I have you on the show, much more so than with other people. And I think it's because you're making a difference, and it's important. I mean, people need to know that even if they don't agree with Dr. Corsi and the writing that he's done about Barack Obama's birth certificate, I was alarmed to see the number of interviews where they're trying to slam Dr. Corsi and accuse him of lying about the birth certificate. I do not believe Dr. Corsi lied. I think everything that he's pointed out about Barack Obama's birth certificate was accurate. I've evaluated independently, and the document, the PDF document that was placed on whitehouse.gov, by all measures appears to be a forgery. So it's another example of these media outlets just putting out a story, and they say it again and again, and they hope that it becomes the truth when it's not.
That's why I love the guy. That's why I believe in him. I believe in my clients. I won't take you as a client unless I believe in you. And, you know, I brought cases with the birth certificate. No judge, except for Judge Roy Moore, ever issued a decision. They just dismissed those cases, no discussion, okay? Because if you raise that issue, somehow you were a racist against African Americans. And by the way, that birth certificate of Obama, 1961, lists his race as African American. That term was not used in 1961. That was coined by Jesse Jackson in the 1970s. At that time in our history, people that were of African American descent wanted to be called black. Before they were called Negro, but they didn't ever refer to themselves as African American. So despite the forensic analysis, which shows that the birth certificate's a fraud, just on its face, it's a fraud.
Yeah.
And that does not mean that Obama was born in Kenya. Some people think he was born to Frank Marshall Davis. My friend and your friend Joel Gilbert, you know, did research on that. But
sure looks like him.
The birth certificate is a fraud, and that's not at issue. And the fact that you raise that does not make you a racist any more than you're a racist, because John McCain didn't qualify as a natural-born citizen to run for the presidency. Neither did Mitt Romney. Neither did Marco Rubio.
Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz. We took all that position. They're not eligible under the Constitution to be president. They're not born to two American citizen parents who were citizens. And that was the criteria that was used by our founding fathers, because they didn't want the Tories to get a hold on our government, because there were a lot of people at the earlier stages of our existence that were still loyal to the British colonies, and parental influence was great. They wanted to make sure that you were one step removed from that if you ran for president.
Larry, I didn't know that Judge Roy Moore had anything to do with the birth certificate. Do you think that what happened with him in terms of the accusations in the court of public opinion were, reciprocity for that decision?
Well, they've used a lot of false information about this judge. He's a very fine man. I believe in the judge, too. And he was the only judge on the Alabama Supreme Court. I brought a case there who said that before you could qualify to run as president, you had to present your original, or at least a certified copy of your birth certificate. That's what he ruled. Now, no other judge on the Alabama Supreme Court made such a ruling. Now, what is wrong with having to present a birth certificate to show that you are actually a natural-born citizen? Yet he's accused of being a racist unfairly. And this is the thing, Jason. I went to school in the South. I went to Duke University. I went to Emory University School of Law. I'm kind of an honorary Southerner myself. And I'll tell you something. The South is less racist than the North in today's world. And, he's branded because he's a Southerner. He's disparaged as a pedophile. He's not a pedophile. They destroyed him because they wanted Doug Jones to be elected senator. And even people in the Republican establishment, like Karl Rove, played a role in doing that, because he challenged Luther Strange, that was Karl Rove's candidate. These two political parties are despicable. We need new political parties. Frankly, I hope they both go under, to be honest.
We just need some integrity is what we need. And Larry, I'm not racist against the number one, but one of the most obvious discrepancies in the birth certificate is that the one in 1961 is very clearly a different color than the rest of the printing here. And there is no good explanation for why that would be the case. There are, I think, Joe Arpaio and his investigation team have identified something like 19 points or 9 points. There's multiple points of forgery in that document, and the fact that it just gets dismissed as racist or a conspiracy theory without being properly investigated is shameful. I don't understand what the purpose of the media and the press is if all they're going to do is go have coffee with Peter Carr at Paul's restaurant and receive stories. You know, we didn't even get into this, but you know, multiple mainstream journalists were contacting Charles Ortel and asking him if he'd been contacted by the special counsel's office, and I am firmly convinced that that was another element of a plan that they had to try to plant stories to implicate Charles and to try to discredit Charles ahead of this Mark Meadows hearing, because they were concerned about what might be revealed there. But Larry, we're just about out of time. Is there anything that you wanted to leave the audience with before we wrap it up for tonight?
Well, if I may say again, is that this is going to be a long fight. It's expensive. Go to CorsiNation.com and contribute to that legal defense fund. It pays the legal fees. And then contribute to Freedom Watch, because we've got these cases out there, not for Dr. Corsi, but for the public interest, that we are your private justice department. We do more than just get documents. We actually bring hard-hitting lawsuits, and we've got grand juries on the horizon that'll begin in January in Ventura County, California. So I hope people support us and they recognize that, you know, we're doing more than just going on cable television. We're actually, you know, trying to bring about justice here.
Yeah, I mean, Larry, I think you might be our last hope here to get justice. So I certainly wish you the best of luck in these ongoing cases. I want to thank you for joining me tonight for this special Saturday night episode. I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to remind people that Crowdsource the Truth is viewer supported. So please go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. A lot of people have been contacting me. They're very unhappy that Patreon has been purging people like Sargon of Assad or Akkad, whatever. I'm sorry, I don't know that guy's YouTube handle properly. Benjamin, British blogger. Also, Milo has been kicked off of Patreon. I totally disagree with Patreon taking a political stance. I will attempt to speak to them about that, but it is still a way that people can sponsor the show. You can also go to paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth. We're working on a transition to Subscribestar, but Subscribestar today, Larry, has just announced that PayPal has dropped support of Subscribestar. So it's interesting to see how these attacks are coming from every angle.
Well, and I urge people to support you, Jason. You're not just my good friend, but I admire you too, because you're not afraid. And we need people like you who are unafraid and will tell the truth. Crowdsource the Truth. The name is quite fitting.
Thank you, Larry. And thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. for Sunday with Charles.